Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eyad,
And my name is Malik.
and we're here to present a snapshot of our paper on this year's term project, which we titled The Influence of Social Media on the Body Image / Self-Esteem of Young People.
In the culture we currently inhabit, our lives are centered around our phones and the content that we view on them. Our data analysis research aims to address how social media affect young people's self-image. While social media has ushered in a new era of linking us all together, it can also cause issues regarding self-esteem and confidence through constant comparison with others. Global media coverage also typically follows a Eurocentric pattern, with a primary focus on problems affecting European and Western communities. These disparities have a significant impact on the standard of living for Eastern people, giving the impression that their existence is unimportant in the eyes of Western consumers. This can be over exaggerated on social media. The media capitalizes on what it perceives as what we want to hear instead of what we need to hear. The clash of ignorance in our civilization centers too much around our own self interest. The routine sharing and liking of photos and videos on social media has set off a series of events that has left individuals with a limited understanding of the world outside what they see on their smartphones. Understanding how ignorant comments and posts affect young people's self esteem is a crucial topic that is useful to understand and bring about a collective future where everyone is seen as more of an equal than before, especially given how the younger generation is developing in this social media driven society.
The goal of our project was to examine the influence of social media on the body image and self-esteem of young people, with a particular emphasis on minority cultures assimilating into Western countries. We aimed to explore the correlation between the trends, particularly in North America, and self-esteem, with an emphasis on exploring these topics through the eyes of young adults that identify with minorities. We know that there is a huge increase in self-esteem issues with teens, as well as an increase in the daily amount of time spent on social media. All of this has already been very well researched. What we wanted to do was use what we learned in this class about data mining to explore trends across posts on Instagram and find correlations between those trends and the underrepresentations minorities feel in Western social media. According to Facebook advertising, for example, 54% of consumers surveyed by Facebook said they do not feel fully culturally represented in online advertising. As well, minority groups are featured in less than 20% of advertising total.
We employed a range of approaches for our data analysis, all of which were included into the course material. We used data mining to gather Instagram posts and comments, sentiment analysis to determine the general attitude of each post and comment, pre-processing to gather our data in CSV format and weed out any irrelevant information, transformation to form the information into our graphical representations, and actionable intelligence to analyze our graphical figures and the entire explored data. The sentiment analysis analyzes whether a text produces an emotional response that is neutral, positive, or negative. We sought to utilize a social media platform that understood the sharing of images, videos, and general viewpoints. Our conclusion led us to choose Instagram as our data source. Every day, hundreds of millions of individuals use Instagram services, making the social media platform's data collection incredibly helpful for our objective.
We used three main tools for gathering data for our paper. The first is called Appify. This was used to scrape Instagram posts for comments, which were then stored in a giant CSV file. The software worked by taking the URL of an Instagram post. It also allowed us to do some pre-processing by removing things like usernames for anonymity. We would then manually go through the data to check for repeated comments, which was a frequent theme. After that, we would then put the data through MonkeyLearn, which did the sentiment analysis for us. It would go through each comment and mark it as either positive or negative, then provide a percentage on how confident it was in the answer. We would again manually inspect the data and change answers if needed. Finally, the work was put through Excel for organization and to create graphs for visual representations of our data.
We gathered comments from a range of individuals on the social media network Instagram during the pre processing step. and we used this data as guidance to ascertain the general sentiment of their statements. Using Monkey-Learn's text mining program, we were able to determine if the comments were good, negative, or neutral. There was a confidence rating associated with the comments to indicate how certain the algorithm was of its conclusion. We were provided with an associated comment with the user who made it, but as the main purpose of our project was to show the overall sentiment expressed across these comments, we deemed the connected usernames to be irrelevant. Our data fit nicely into our gathering procedures, and after examining and verifying our data, we looked at the confidence level and how it related to the sentiment conclusion. If the confidence level was high, we kept the answer as it was. But if it was low, we looked through the comments to manually calculate the sentiment value ourselves.
For the sake of keeping the presentation concise, we focused on a handful of posts that we analyzed, as well as the general finding from these posts. We found that posts that were dealing with foreign or abroad affairs were met with a more negative reaction, while posts that dealt with Western or North American influencers and brands were met with a more positive reaction. We found pretty much exactly what we expected to see, and this was a more positive general reception to posts that fell in line with Western perspectives as well as Eurocentric trends. Even, as you can see from the graphs, posts with minority models were met with a slightly more negative reaction. The Burberry post in this example had an Asian model and a slightly more negative reaction versus the Louis Vuitton post, which had a Caucasian model. We also found that posts related to news had an overall more negative reception, though as previously stated, posts that focused on foreign affairs were met more negatively than those that focused on domestic affairs. There was also a more positive reaction to Caucasian influencers, as evidenced here by Kylie Jenner, versus influencers that identified with minorities. The danger in this is that it creates a framework that entails a general comprehension of what is regarded as acceptable or unacceptable in Western culture, as well as what we anticipate seeing and what we comprehend in terms of our morals and lifestyles. Social media already is mentally draining for youth, so when you're consistently seeing a more positive reaction to a world that isn't yours, it can make it even harder.
Highlights from the project include the fact that we collaborated on handling the information and data at every level. Eyad would perform the data collection by scraping, then deliver the raw data to me so I could feed it into the Monkey-Learn program. We created our numerous graphs and overall analysis of the provided social data after first processing the raw data to configure its sentiment analysis. We faced a number of challenges, including navigating the data mining options because there were so many options available. Selecting a successful social media platform, there are several successful options for social media, including Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and more. Similarity in raw data, since several components of our data collection would duplicate comments once or more. We used manual data editing to address some of the duplication problems. Our analysis, thankfully, went as smoothly as it could, leaving us with very few problems to cope with throughout our task. Spending more time on selecting the ideal program to data mine from would be something we would do differently if we were to approach this analysis today. Because we encountered duplicate errors, having a much more reliable choice would have saved some time in data collections.
In conclusion, the failure of intercultural communication enables Western culture to ignore and downplay the sentiment of the body image and self-esteem of young people. The issues and prejudices that affect the lives of young people frequently go undetected or forgotten in our Western thinking, leaving a disproportionate representation of how the world sees Eastern intersectional perspectives. And while we aim to explore the perspectives of minorities assimilating in the West, we found that there was just as much of an overall lack of representations for minorities in general. This included African Americans, Indigenous North Americans, South Americans, and more. According to Microsoft Advertising, 70% of Gen Z consumers are more trusting of brands that represent diversity in ads, so it's in their best interest to do more work in inclusivity as well. Brands do seem to be getting better at including more diversity, but there is still work to be done.
Something to take away from this project is the realization that the Western systemic discriminatory media coverage leads to ignorance and dismissive opinions towards the rest of the world. This lack of care creates an ideology that depicts the West as the only place where opinions and issues can gain attention.
Thank you very much for listening.